The mist clung to the ancient pines as 12-year-old Lucas trudged through the mountain forest, shoulders weighted with responsibility since father's accident left him bedridden 3 months ago. Only Scout, his aging border collie with a graying muzzle, provided loyal companionship as they ventured deeper into the wilderness than ever before, the autumn chill biting through his worn jacket. A sudden whimper broke the silence, Scout pawing frantically at what appeared to be an overgrown hillside beneath a twisted oak. Brushing away decades of moss and tangled roots revealed a small opening, perfectly constructed yet clearly not modern, its entrance adorned with faded symbols. Inside, Lucas's trembling flashlight illuminated centuries-old pictographs adorning walls of packed clay. But in the center lay objects impossible to reconcile with the shelter's ancient origins, including a weathered leather journal bearing his family name and a tarnished pocket watch he recognized from photographs. What secrets had been buried on their mountain for generations? How were these modern artifacts connected to his ancestors? And why did the final entry in the journal contain a desperate warning written in his grandfather's handwriting? Heart racing, Lucas gathered the journal and pocket watch, tucking them into his jacket before backing out of the shelter. Unable to shake the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes that seemed to press against his back with each step toward home, Scout staying unusually close to his heels, hackles slightly raised as they hurried down the winding path that suddenly felt foreign despite traversing it hundreds of times before. Their small cabin appeared through the trees, smoke rising in thin wisps from the chimney where the morning's fire was dying without fresh fuel, the bundle of forgotten kindlings scattered where Lucas had dropped it in his excitement of discovery. The door creaked as he pushed it open, Scout slipping past his legs while Lucas stood frozen in the doorway, his father's voice calling weakly from the bedroom. "That you, son? Didn't get much wood, did you?" The boy swallowed hard, crossing the worn floorboards to his father's bedside, the man's once strong frame now withered beneath quilts piled against the mountain chill. Eyes sunken into a face that had aged years in mere months since the logging accident had shattered his body and their livelihood in one terrible moment. Lucas's words tumbled out in a breathless rush, describing the hidden entrance, the ancient symbols, the inexplicable modern objects, holding out the journal with its familiar family name embossed on the cover. But his father's expression shifted from patient listening to dismissive concern as he reached a trembling hand to touch his son's forehead. "You've got quite an imagination, boy. You've been reading too many of those adventure books from the school library," his voice gentle but firm as he added, "Now go put away those things and fetch some real firewood from the pile out back before we freeze tonight." Confusion and disappointment knotted in Lucas's stomach as he nodded silently. Tucking the journal back inside his jacket, recognizing the determined set of his father's jaw that meant further discussion was pointless, yet unable to reconcile the dismissal with the visceral certainty that what he'd found was both real and significant, beyond his comprehension. Later, with the cabin warmed by fresh logs and his father drifting into uneasy sleep aided by the pills that never seemed to dull his pain completely, Lucas retreated to his small bedroom, easing the door closed before pulling the journal from his hiding place beneath the loose floorboard where he kept his few treasures. The leather cover felt warm against his palms as he sat cross-legged on his bed, Scout curling protectively beside him, the single lamp casting long shadows across the walls as he carefully opened to the first page, heart stuttering at the inscription written in faded ink, "Property of Thomas Wheeler, record of my findings, 1992 to 1995. His grandfather's name stared back at him, the handwriting matching the birthday cards preserved in his mother's memory box, cards that had stopped arriving abruptly when Lucas was just 2 years old, the same year his grandfather had vanished into these mountains without explanation or goodbye, leaving nothing but whispered rumors and his father's bitter silence that forbade questions and buried secrets deeper than winter snow. Sleep eluded Lucas that night, the grandfather clock in the living room marking each hour with solemn chimes that echoed through the cabin's thin walls as he pored over the journal's early entries by flashlight. Scout's warmth against his side, the only comfort in a world suddenly filled with questions that multiplied with each yellowed page he turned. His fingers trembling slightly as his grandfather's precise handwriting revealed a man far different from the family stories or lack thereof that had shaped his phantom presence in Lucas's life. The first entries dated from early spring 1992, detailing Thomas Wheeler's growing friendship with members of the Ahwahnee tribe who had inhabited these mountains for centuries before being displaced to reservations, particularly with an elder named Gray Bear who had recognized something in Thomas that marked him as a listener to the old ways, a keeper of sacred knowledge yet to be revealed. Through Gray Bear, his grandfather had been welcomed into tribal ceremonies normally closed to outsiders, learning of the 7 sacred sites scattered across the mountains, places where the membrane between worlds grows thin, where healing and power flow like underground springs waiting to be tapped by those with the wisdom to drink without poisoning the source. The journal's tone shifted dramatically in entries from late 1993, the handwriting becoming more urgent, less methodical, as Thomas documented meetings with men in expensive shoes who ask questions about mineral deposits but stare too long at the sacred sites marked on my survey maps. And later, Vertex mining representatives offered twice market value for the land today when I declined. The man's smile never reached his eyes as he suggested, "I consider while the offer stands." Lucas's heart hammered against his ribs as he read his grandfather's growing concerns about unmarked vehicles parked along the Forest Service road, equipment that disappeared from his workshop, the strange illness that struck Gray Bear after confronting trespassers near one of the sacred sites. A sound outside his window startled him from his reading. Scout's ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in the dog's chest as Lucas carefully peered through the frost-edged glass, the hairs on his neck rising at the sight of slow-moving headlights cutting through the pre-dawn fog. A black SUV with tinted windows creeping past their cabin with predatory deliberation, its engine nearly silent despite the rugged terrain, a vehicle that had no reason to be on their remote mountain road at 4 in the morning. Lucas ducked instinctively as a spotlight swept briefly across their property before the vehicle continued around the bend, its taillights disappearing into the mist like dying embers, leaving him with the absolute certainty they had been examining the cabin, looking for something or someone. With trembling hands, he returned to the journal, flipping forward several months to an entry circled multiple times in red ink. Gray Bear performed the blessing today, marking me as a guardian of the 7th site, the most powerful and dangerous of them all. He believes Vertex knows about the healing properties, but not the true source or its price. The symbols on my skin will help shield me, but the true protection lies in keeping the knowledge scattered, the map incomplete. What they seek could heal thousands or destroy everything that makes these mountains sacred. I pray I've hidden the pieces well enough that they cannot be reassembled except by one who carries Wheeler blood and Ahwahnee blessing. The final line sent ice through Lucas's veins. They're watching the cabin now. If anything happens to me. The truth lies beneath the 7th stone where the river bends twice. Lucas closed the journal as the first rays of dawn crept through his window, illuminating the pocket watch he'd found alongside it. Its face stopped at 7:07, the exact time his grandfather had reportedly vanished while hiking 3 decades ago, the hands frozen as if time itself had been suspended in that moment, waiting for someone to wind it back to life and continue a story long interrupted but apparently far from finished. Morning arrived with a thin blanket of fog clinging to the valley below their cabin, Lucas moving mechanically through his chores with the journal hidden safely beneath the loose floorboard, his mind turning over his grandfather's warnings like river stones worn smooth with endless examination, barely tasting the oatmeal he prepared for his father, who watched him with narrowed eyes and unspoken questions about his son's unusual quietness. The crunch of tires on gravel jerked Lucas from his thoughts, Scout barking sharply before racing to the window, tail wagging in recognition rather than alarm, as an ancient blue pickup truck rattled to a stop beside their porch, its once vibrant paint faded to the color of summer sky reflected in still water. Mrs. Whitefeather emerged slowly from the driver's side, her silver hair bound in a traditional braid that hung over one shoulder of her worn denim jacket, her face a roadmap of deep lines that spoke of 90 years witnessing the mountain's changing seasons. Her movements deliberate but not frail, as she retrieved a basket covered with a red cloth from the passenger seat. Lucas hurried to open the door before she could knock, surprised by this unexpected visit from their closest neighbor who lived 3 miles down the mountain and rarely ventured out except for tribal council meetings or medical necessities. Her dark eyes studying his face with unsettling intensity before she spoke. "Your father's sleeping, boy? Good. We need to talk alone," she said, stepping past him into the cabin with the familiarity of someone who had visited many times before his birth, placing the basket on the kitchen table and revealing a collection of herbal bundles beneath the cloth. "Brought some tea for your father's pain. Better than those pills that cloud his mind without healing what's broken," she explained, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to arrange the bundles. But her movements faltered as her gaze landed on the small corner of leather peeking from Lucas's jacket pocket where he had hastily stuffed the journal after returning from the chicken coop. "Where did you find that?" she whispered, voice suddenly sharp as a hawk's cry, reaching with surprising speed to extract the journal before Lucas could react, her weathered fingers trembling visibly as they traced the embossed name. "You've been to the shelter, haven't you? Just like your grandfather. Stubborn Wheeler blood that can't leave sacred things buried." Lucas stammered an explanation about Scout finding the entrance, about the symbols on the wall, pulling out his phone to show the photos he'd taken of the strange pictographs that reminded him of petroglyphs he'd studied in history class, but seemed to contain elements both ancient and unexplainable. "Mrs. Whitefeather sank heavily onto the kitchen chair, the journal clutched against her chest as if to protect it from invisible harm, her eyes never leaving Lucas's face as she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Some things are buried for a reason, boy. Some secrets are meant to stay in darkness because the light that fills them might blind those unprepared for its power, just as it blinded your grandfather who thought knowledge could be contained like water in cupped hands." She paused, looking toward the window where mist now wrapped the cabin like a cocoon, isolating them from the watching world beyond as she carefully opened the journal to the first page, a single tear tracking down her cheek as she touched Thomas Wheeler's handwriting. "Gray Bear was my husband," she said simply, answering the question Lucas hadn't asked. "He recognized the old soul in your grandfather, taught him our ways, made him a guardian when outsiders came hunting what they could never understand, what was never meant for them to possess." Her eyes moved to the photos on Lucas's phone, lingering on particular symbols with recognition that confirmed Lucas's suspicion that she could read what remained indecipherable to him, knowledge preserved through generations of oral tradition suddenly critical to understanding the mystery that had claimed his grandfather and now reached for him across decades of silence. "I will translate these," she said finally, her voice heavy with reluctance and something that sounded like fear, "not because you should know, but because without understanding, you have already stepped onto a path that others will force you to walk regardless, and Thomas would never forgive me if I let his grandson face this darkness without light to guide him." Mrs. Whitefeather departed with the photographs and a promise to return in 3 days' time, leaving Lucas with strict instructions not to revisit the shelter or speak of his discovery to anyone, her eyes darting meaningfully toward his father's bedroom door as she gathered her basket, the weight of unspoken history hanging between them like mountain mist that refuses to burn away under even the strongest sunlight. The remainder of the day passed in a fog of mundane tasks and racing thoughts, Lucas splitting wood until his palms blistered while Scout patrolled the perimeter of their property with unusual vigilance, both boy and dog sensing changes in their small world that defied simple explanation or easy dismissal. That evening, after serving his father a dinner barely touched by either of them, Lucas administered the prescribed pain medication that inevitably sent the injured man into a heavy, troubled sleep marked by occasional mumbles that never quite formed coherent sentences, but seemed laden with distress that medication could mask but not eliminate. Watching his father's features finally relax into temporary peace, Lucas was struck by a sudden, overwhelming curiosity about the pills themselves. The small orange bottles always appearing with mathematical precision every month since the accident, despite their tenuous financial situation and rural isolation that made regular doctor visits nearly impossible. Details that had never seemed strange until the discovery of the journal and its warnings about powerful interests connected to these mountains. Taking advantage of his father's medicated slumber, Lucas carefully slid open the nightstand drawer where the bottles were kept, surprised to find it stuck halfway, as if something blocked its path from within. requiring careful maneuvering to fully extend without making noise that might disturb the sleeping man. Reaching into the back corner where the drawer had caught, his fingers closed around a small metal box tucked behind the neatly arranged medication bottles, its surface cool and smooth, secured with a simple combination lock that yielded to his father's birth date after 3 attempts, revealing contents that sent cold reality washing over Lucas like plunging into the mountain creek during spring snowmelt. Nestled inside the box lay 3 additional medication bottles with labels markedly different from those prescribed by Dr. Henning in town, these bearing the clinical logo of Vertex Research Division, along with alphanumeric codes instead of medication names, warning labels indicating experimental status, and his father's patient identification number printed in bold red digits that seemed to pulse in the dim bedroom light. Lucas photographed the bottles with trembling hands before returning everything exactly as he had found it, retreating to the kitchen where he sat staring at the images on his phone, pieces of a puzzle assembling themselves into a picture he could see but not yet comprehend, connections forming between his grandfather's warnings, his father's mysterious illness that doctors struggled to diagnose before the accident that had conveniently removed him from work and public scrutiny, and the Vertex Mining Company that appeared in both narratives, separated by 30 years of mountain silence. Morning arrived with leaden skies threatening early snow, and a determination that pushed Lucas to confront his father directly, waiting until the man had finished his breakfast before placing his phone on the bedside table, screen displaying the photographed medication bottles like evidence in a trial without witnesses, his voice steadier than his pounding heart as he asked simply, "What is Vertex giving you, Dad? And what does it have to do with grandfather's journal?" The change that came over his father's face transcended physical transformation, color draining from his already pale features as his eyes widened with recognition and then narrowed with something Lucas had never witnessed before, a combination of fear and fury that twisted his expression into someone unrecognizable as he struggled to sit upright, grabbing Lucas's wrist with surprising strength for a man who claimed he could barely feed himself. "Where did you get that journal? You went to the shelter, didn't you? After all my warnings about staying close to the cabin?" His father hissed, fingers digging painfully into Lucas's arm, voice rising with each word until it cracked on the final demand. "You will stop this now, Lucas. Burn that journal if you still have it. Forget whatever you think you found. And never, never go back to that shelter, or so help me. I will send you to your mother's sister in Pittsburgh until you forget these mountains ever existed." That night, sleep came in fitful bursts for Lucas, his father's uncharacteristic outburst replaying in his mind alongside fragments from the journal, questions multiplying like shadows at sunset stretching across their small clearing, too numerous and elongated to examine individually, yet impossible to ignore as they collectively darkened his understanding of the world he thought he knew. He had retreated to his room without argument after the confrontation, recognizing a boundary in his father's eyes that warned against further discussion, the tension between them thick enough to slice with the hunting knife hanging unused by the door since the accident had rendered his father's once steady hands unreliable for even the simplest tasks. Midnight passed according to the grandfather clock's solemn announcement, then 1, then 2. Lucas drifting between troubled consciousness and dreams filled with symbols that shifted like living things when he tried to focus on their meaning, his grandfather's face appearing and dissolving before recognition could fully form, voices speaking words that made sense only in the dream state and evaporated upon waking. It was Scout who finally pulled him fully into alertness, the border collie's low warning growl vibrating through the mattress where he lay pressed against Lucas's side, ears forward, body rigid with attention focused toward the window where thin moonlight filtered through parting clouds to cast silver patterns across the bedroom floor. Lucas held his breath, straining to hear whatever had disturbed the dog's sensitive hearing, the silence of the mountain night so complete that his own heartbeat seemed thunderous in comparison, until a faint mechanical whirring reached him, so subtle it might have been mistaken for insect sounds had summer not surrendered to autumn weeks earlier, rendering the night silent of natural buzzing or chirping. Carefully sliding from beneath the covers, Lucas crouched below the windowsill, raising himself just enough to peer outside without silhouetting himself against the glass. Scout maintaining his alert posture on the bed with admirable restraint, trained to guard without unnecessary noise that might reveal their awareness to whatever threat approached through the darkness. The moonlight revealed a figure moving methodically around the perimeter of their property, stopping at intervals to place small devices into the ground or attach them to trees, each object momentarily blinking with tiny red lights before going dark. The person's movements deliberate and practiced as they consulted what appeared to be a tablet screen glowing with blue-white light that illuminated features concealed beneath a hooded jacket. What struck Lucas most powerfully was not the trespassers' actions but their equipment. Far too sophisticated for local hunters or Forest Service personnel, the devices clearly electronic rather than traps or wildlife cameras, creating what appeared to be a perimeter around the cabin focused particularly densely near the path, leading toward the ridge where the hidden shelter lay beneath centuries of accumulated secrets. Lucas leaned closer to the glass, trying to discern details of the tablet screen, his elbow accidentally knocking a book from the windowsill. The soft thud against the wooden floor, seemingly insignificant in the enclosed space of his bedroom but carrying across the night air with alarming clarity, causing the figure to freeze in mid-motion, head snapping toward Lucas's window with the focused precision of a predator identifying prey. What happened next defied logical explanation, the figure's movement from stillness to blinding speed, occurring without transition, no gathering of muscles or preparatory shift of weight, simply existence in one spot followed by existence in another as they crossed the clearing toward the forest edge, moving with fluid grace that seemed to blur the boundaries between human limitation and something else entirely, something that vanished into the tree line seconds before Scout finally lost his composure and erupted into frantic barking that would surely wake Lucas's father and require explanations Lucas himself did not possess for what he had just witnessed beneath the cold, indifferent light of the mountain moon. Morning arrived with Lucas exhausted yet determined, fabricating normalcy during breakfast while his father watched him with suspicious eyes, neither mentioning the midnight disturbance that had brought Raymond Wheeler stumbling to Lucas's door demanding explanation for Scout's frantic barking, accepting with visible skepticism the story about a raccoon at the window that Lucas offered while avoiding direct eye contact. The school bus arrived precisely at 7:30 as it had every weekday since September, Lucas clutching his backpack containing the journal hidden beneath textbooks, having decided that keeping it with him was safer than leaving it in the cabin where his father might search for it during his absence. The weight of it against his back both comforting and terrifying as he navigated the social wilderness of Pinetop High School with its enrollment of barely 100 students spread across 4 grades. Lucas moved through morning classes in a fog of distraction, earning concerned glances from teachers accustomed to his attentive participation, counting minutes until the lunch period when he could access the small library tucked at the end of the west hallway, where ancient computers and dusty books provided the only research resources available without the hour-long drive to the county library in Riverston. Miss Caldwell looked up from her desk as the library door opened, her wireframe glasses perched on a narrow nose, silver hair cut in a precise bob that swung when she turned her head, smiling with professional warmth that never quite reached her pale blue eyes. As Lucas approached with casual nonchalance, he hoped concealed his racing heart. Native American history of the region, he explained, gesturing toward the reference section. For Mr. Patterson's local history project, the lie slipping easily from lips unaccustomed to deception but adapting quickly to necessity as survival instinct overrode moral discomfort. Miss Caldwell's smile shifted almost imperceptibly, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been mere interest, or something more calculating as she rose from her chair with unexpected grace for a woman Lucas had always considered ancient, though he now realized she moved with the fluid energy of someone far younger than her appearance suggested. Fascinating subject, she remarked, leading him toward a locked cabinet behind her desk rather than the public shelves, unlocking it with keys that hung around her neck on a silver chain partially concealed beneath her conservative blouse. These materials are too valuable for general circulation, but I can allow a serious student access for in-library use only. The books she placed before him were indeed remarkable, their leather bindings cracked with age but meticulously preserved, pages filled with detailed accounts of the Ahwahnee people who had inhabited the mountains long before European settlement. including hand-drawn maps of sacred sites that made Lucas's breath catch in his throat as he recognized configurations similar to those hinted at in his grandfather's journal. "Finding anything specific you're looking for?" Miss Caldwell asked, hovering beside the table rather than returning to her desk, eyes tracking his finger as it moved across a particular symbol that matched one photographed in the shelter. Her voice casual yet underlaid with tension that raised warning flags in Lucas's mind, prompting him to close the book slightly more than necessary. "Just general information," he replied with a shrug carefully calibrated to suggest teenage indifference, "though these markings are interesting. Kind of like some rock art I saw while hiking near Thunder Ridge last summer, deliberately misdirecting from the actual shelter location while watching for reaction that came subtly but unmistakably, her fingers tightening momentarily on the chair back before relaxing, her smile never faltering though something cold and analytical entered her gaze as she leaned closer, voice dropping to ensure privacy in the already empty library. The Awani believed certain places held power that flowed from the earth itself, healing power sought by many but understood by few, she offered, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. "If you've found something interesting on your property, Lucas, I have connections with historical preservation societies that would be very interested, very generous with landowners who help preserve such discoveries, rather than keeping them secret." 3 days passed with excruciating slowness, Lucas avoiding both Miss Caldwell's increasingly persistent offers of help with his research project and his father's watchful gaze that followed him around their small cabin with the intensity of a man guarding secrets he feared might escape. His control at any moment, the tension between them stretching like an overwound spring waiting to snap under the slightest additional pressure. Scout alerted him to Mrs. Whitefeather's arrival late Thursday afternoon with excited barking that held none of the warning notes from the midnight encounter. The ancient blue pickup rattling up their drive just as his father had finally fallen into medicated sleep that would likely last until morning, timing that struck Lucas as deliberate rather than coincidental, as the elderly woman declined his offer to enter the cabin, instead motioning him to join her on the sagging porch where fallen leaves gathered in corners and the first hints of coming winter hung visibly in their clouded breath. Not much to translate, she began without preamble, handing him several pages of handwritten notes in elegant script that belied her age and the arthritic hands that produced it, some symbols too worn by time, others in language variations even I cannot fully understand without consulting elders from neighboring tribes, knowledge fractured when our people were scattered across reservations, much lost that can never be recovered. Lucas scanned the pages eagerly, finding detailed translations beside careful reproductions of the symbols he had photographed, revealing phrases that sent shivers across his skin despite the heavy jacket protecting him from the mountain chill. Gateway between seen and unseen realms, threshold of the 7 sacred boundaries, place of healing and harm where seekers find what they bring within themselves multiplied tenfold. Mrs. Whitefeather watched his reaction with ancient eyes that had witnessed generations of wheeler men grappling with mysteries beyond their understanding, her voice soft yet carrying easily in the crisp autumn air as she explained. "Our people believed these 7 sites marked places where the membrane between worlds grows thin, where energy flows from deep within the earth like invisible rivers that can heal sickness, restore balance, or grant visions of paths not yet taken, but also places that amplify the darkness within those who come seeking power rather than wisdom, their greed poisoning the very springs they wish to control." She described how generations of tribal guardians had protected these sites from those who would exploit them, disguising entrances, creating false trails, embedding warnings comprehensible only to those trained in their meaning, her fingers tracing particular symbols that formed a complex map Lucas now recognized as correlating to formations described in his grandfather's journal. Greybear was last of his lineage designated as guardian of the 7th site, the most powerful nexus where all energies converge, she continued, hesitation entering her voice for the first time, until he recognized something in your grandfather that transcended bloodlines. Sensing an old soul who could be trusted with knowledge traditionally passed only through our people. Lucas seized the opening, reaching into his jacket to extract the journal he now carried everywhere, watching her expression closely as he asked, Is that why my grandfather wrote about being marked as a guardian in his journal? About Vertex Mining, knowing about the healing properties but not understanding the source or its price. The transformation was immediate and disturbing, Mrs. Whitefeather recoiling as if physically struck, her weathered face draining of color as she rose with surprising agility, gathering her papers with trembling hands, several sheets escaping to dance across the porch, on sudden wind that seemed to respond to her distress, whispering urgently, "You've read more than you told me, boy." Passages not meant for unprepared minds or spoken aloud near listening devices, her eyes darting to the trees where Lucas had spotted the mysterious figure, placing objects 3 nights earlier, adding cryptically, "Guards the 7th stone where river bends twice. Remember that but never speak it," before hurrying to her truck without further explanation, leaving Lucas clutching the journal with questions multiplying faster than answers could possibly follow. Saturday morning arrived with unusual commotion. Lucas waking to the sound of unfamiliar voices in their living room, his father speaking with uncharacteristic animation that immediately raised suspicions as he hurriedly dressed and moved cautiously down the hallway, pausing just before the doorway to observe the scene without immediately announcing his presence. A man in his 40s sat on their worn sofa, his charcoal suit and polished leather shoes absurdly formal against the cabin's rustic interior, silver cufflinks catching morning light from the window as he gestured with manicured hands, a briefcase open on the coffee table displaying documents arranged with meticulous precision beside a thermos that filled the room with the aroma of coffee far more expensive than the generic brand they purchased at the general store. 20 miles down the mountain. "Mr. Wheeler, I understand your hesitation given your family's long history with this property," the man was saying, his voice cultured with an accent Lucas couldn't quite place, "but Vertex Consolidated Resources is prepared to offer 3 times market value, which would certainly provide for your medical needs and your son's education far better than this." He paused, glancing around with barely disguised distaste. Charming but clearly challenging living situation. Lucas stepped into the room as his father shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair, Scout pressing against the boy's leg with unusual wariness, hackles slightly raised despite no overt threat, the visitor turning with practiced smoothness that suggested awareness of Lucas's presence before he had revealed himself. "Ah, this must be young Lucas." The man smiled without warmth, extending a business card with a single fluid motion. "Richard Carrington, Vice President of Community Relations for Vertex. Pleasure to meet the youngest Wheeler at last." The card felt abnormally heavy in Lucas's hand, expensive paper stock embossed with a logo that sent electric recognition through his body. A stylized V intersected by what appeared to be a mountain range, but which Lucas immediately recognized as 7 points arranged in precisely the pattern his grandfather had drawn repeatedly throughout the later journal entries, always accompanied by increasingly urgent warnings about those who would drain the source without understanding its nature or respecting its guardians. Lucas's father watched the exchange with complex emotions, crossing his pale features, clearly torn between desperate financial need and something deeper, perhaps loyalty to land his family had inhabited for generations or knowledge of whatever had caused his father to disappear rather than sell. 3 decades earlier, when Lucas's grandfather had faced similar offers from the same company. "The papers require only your signature, Mr. Wheeler," Carrington continued smoothly, sliding an expensive fountain pen across the coffee table, after which funds would be transferred immediately to the account specified, with ample time provided for relocation, of course, and our company physician would naturally ensure continuity of your. He glanced meaningfully at the prescription bottles visible on the kitchen counter. Medical requirements. Something in this last statement caused Raymond Wheeler's expression to harden, his hand withdrawing from where it had hovered uncertainly above the documents, asking with deliberate casualness that failed to mask underlying tension, "And if we decline your generous offer, Mr. Carrington, what then?" The corporate representative's smile remained fixed, while something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes, closing his briefcase with a decisive click that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent cabin, replying with practiced regret that contained unmistakable warning. "Then we continue our geological survey of adjacent properties while monitoring environmental compliance on private inholdings such as yours, process that often identifies regulatory issues requiring significant investment to remedy, particularly for properties with limited financial resources, such unfortunate situations frequently resulting in eventual sale under less favorable terms. But I sincerely hope such unpleasantness proves unnecessary in your case, Mr. Wheeler. Carrington's departure left a palpable tension hanging in the cabin like the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. Raymond Wheeler staring at the business card his son still held, with an expression that cycled rapidly between fear, resignation, and a determination Lucas had not witnessed since before the accident, as if some internal barrier had finally crumbled under the weight of external threats, now impossible to ignore or deflect with convenient lies about raccoons at windows or childish imagination. "We need to talk about your grandfather," Raymond finally said after the sound of expensive tires on gravel had faded into mountain silence, wheeling himself to the window to verify Carrington's departure before gesturing Lucas to close and lock the door, continuing in a voice barely above whisper, as if concerned about being overheard even within their isolated cabin. "What have you found, and what have you read in his journal?" Lucas hesitated, years of conditioning to avoid this very topic warring with desperate need for answers that might explain the increasingly dangerous situation surrounding them. Finally retrieving the leather-bound volume from its hiding place beneath his jacket hung by the door, placing it on the kitchen table between them, like physical manifestation of the secrets that had divided their family across generations. His father's hands trembled visibly as he opened the journal to early entries Lucas had already memorized, fingers tracing Thomas Wheeler's handwriting with unmistakable recognition, tinged with grief, long suppressed beneath anger that suddenly seemed misdirected, a shield against pain rather than genuine emotion. "He didn't abandon us," Raymond stated flatly, eyes fixed on the journal rather than meeting his son's questioning gaze. "Whatever you've heard or whatever I might have implied when you were younger, your grandfather didn't walk away from his family or his responsibilities. He disappeared fighting Vertex and their attempts to acquire these mountains for purposes beyond simple mining operations, purposes connected to the shelter you've discovered, and the others scattered across land our family has protected for generations without fully understanding what we were guarding." Words spilled from Raymond in increasing urgency, revealing fragments of truth without coherent narrative. How Thomas had organized local resistance against Vertex's land acquisition, gathering evidence of environmental violations while forming unlikely alliance with Ahwahnee tribal elders who recognized shared interest in protecting sacred sites from corporate exploitation. How protests had gained national media attention until participants began experiencing mysterious illnesses, tribal elders dying of supposedly natural causes, while others simply disappeared during routine activities. Thomas Wheeler becoming increasingly secretive about his movements, even with family as threats intensified, until the morning he left for a meeting with environmental activists and never returned. His truck found abandoned near Thunder Ridge with no signs of struggle, yet no trace of the man himself, despite extensive searches spanning months. After he vanished, Vertex approached with their first offer. Raymond continued, voice hardening with familiar bitterness, as if they knew exactly how long to wait, as if they knew exactly what had happened while authorities remained baffled. The timing too convenient to be coincidence, yet impossible to prove connection without evidence that died with your grandfather or remains hidden where even I haven't discovered it despite years searching before my accident. Lucas leaned forward, seizing the opening to ask the question burning since discovering the shelter. "Is that why you want me to stay away from the shelter? Because of what happened to grandfather?" Something flickered in Raymond's eyes. Calculation or protective instinct impossible to distinguish as he gripped his son's wrist with surprising strength. Voice dropping to urgent whisper, "You will stay away from that place, Lucas. Not because of what happened to your grandfather, but because of what's happening to me. What will happen to you if they realize you've found it? Connections I cannot explain without putting you in greater danger. Knowledge that protects you only through your ignorance of its significance." His father's partial confession left Lucas with more questions than answers. The deliberate gaps in Raymond Wheeler's narrative, suggesting knowledge too dangerous to share yet too important to ignore, driving him to spend Sunday morning ostensibly completing homework at the town's small public library, while actually accessing their microfilm archives containing local newspaper records stretching back decades. grateful for the weekend librarian who barely glanced up from her romance novel as he requested materials from 1992 through 1995, the years documented in his grandfather's journal before his mysterious disappearance. The ancient microfilm reader hummed and clicked as Lucas scrolled through mundane local news of county fairs and high school sports championships, stopping abruptly when headlines from September 1993 announced local landowners protest mining expansion above a photograph showing a group of determined individuals holding handmade signs outside county offices. Thomas Wheeler, standing prominently beside Gray Bear and other tribal members Lucas recognized from descriptions in the journal, their unlikely alliance bridging cultural divisions through shared commitment to protecting the mountains they both claimed through different traditions and histories. Subsequent articles documented escalating tensions as Vertex Mining pursued land acquisition through various legal channels, while Thomas Wheeler organized increasingly effective resistance, gathering environmental impact data and helping tribal representatives document sacred sites that qualified for protection under preservation statutes, corporate representatives countering with promises of jobs and economic development for a region struggling with poverty following timber industry decline. A December article quoted his grandfather directly. "This isn't about conventional mining operations, but something far more destructive they're concealing behind standard permits. Activities that would permanently damage not just the environment but cultural heritage sites irreplaceable once destroyed." Accusations Vertex dismissed as unfounded conspiracy theories from individuals impeding legitimate business development beneficial to the entire community. Lucas continued scrolling through 1994 coverage, tension building in his chest as headlines shifted from environmental protests to unexplained illnesses striking key opposition figures. Beginning with tribal elders hospitalized with symptoms doctors struggled to diagnose, followed by other protest leaders experiencing similar mysterious ailments that local health authorities attributed to possible environmental toxin exposure, while finding no common source connecting affected individuals beyond their opposition to Vertex operations. The final article from March 1995 featured the headline, "Search Continues for Missing Environmental Activist," beside a photograph from Thomas Wheeler's last public appearance at a protest where participants had fallen ill during the event itself, several being transported to hospitals, while others reported disorientation and weakness persisting for days afterward. But it was not his grandfather who captured Lucas's attention in the grainy image, but a figure standing at the edge of the gathered crowd, observing rather than participating, features unmistakable despite 3 decades separating the photograph from present day. Lucas enlarged the section showing a woman whose silver bob haircut and wireframe glasses matched exactly those worn by Miss Caldwell as he had seen her just days earlier in the school library. Her appearance utterly unchanged by the 30 years that should have transformed a middle-aged woman into elderly status. Same precise posture, same watchful expression, same cold assessment in her gaze as she observed the protesters who would soon experience unexplained illnesses, the timestamp on the photograph leaving no possibility of mistaken identity or coincidental resemblance between relative or descendant. Only the impossible conclusion that the school librarian who had shown such interest in his research had not aged a single day since attending protests. His grandfather led shortly before vanishing from these same mountains that now seemed less a homeland and more a carefully constructed trap closing around the latest Wheeler to discover its secrets. Lucas left the library with his head spinning from the impossible photograph, carefully photographing the microfilm image with his phone before hurrying to catch the last bus heading toward the mountain roads. The driver grumbling about schedule and dropping him at the turnoff, still 2 miles from home, forcing him to jog the remaining distance as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley below. Anxiety building with each step as he considered what to share with his father versus what to keep hidden while processing Miss Caldwell's inexplicable presence in historical events she should have been too young to witness or too old to have survived with such preserved appearance. The first sign something was wrong came when Scout failed to greet him with customary barking as he approached the clearing, the cabin sitting unnaturally quiet against the backdrop of rustling pines. Front door standing slightly ajar, though his father's condition made such carelessness impossible without assistance. Lucas slowing his approach instinctively, scanning the tree line for watchers before cautiously pushing the door wider with mounting dread that crystallized into cold certainty upon seeing the cabin's interior. Drawers stood open, furniture displaced, cushions removed from sofas and chairs. Systematic disruption evident in every room, including his father's bedroom where personal items lay scattered across rumpled bedding. Yet Raymond Wheeler himself sat calmly in his wheelchair beside the kitchen window, staring out at the gathering dusk as if nothing unusual had occurred in his absence, turning with unsettling serenity when Lucas entered, stating flatly, "They were very professional. Barely disturbed me at all. Claimed to be conducting routine environmental testing requiring interior inspection under county ordinances I apparently agreed to when accepting medical assistance. Papers all perfectly official except for signatures I never provided, and regulations that likely exist only in documents created for this specific purpose." The deliberate calm in his father's voice frightened Lucas more than the violation itself, suggesting resignation rather than surprise, expectation rather than shock, knowledge of events unfolding according to pattern previously witnessed during his grandfather's final days. Raymond adding with careful neutrality that revealed underlying tension. "They were particularly interested in your room, Lucas. Spent considerable time examining your belongings while believing I was sedated by medication they watched me take before beginning their search. Medication I've learned to mimic consuming while actually securing beneath my tongue when necessary. Small resistances being all that remain available to a man in my condition." Lucas hurried to his bedroom, heart pounding as he checked the loose floorboard beneath his bed where the journal remained safely hidden, his father's next words following him down the hallway with chilling implication. "They knew exactly what they were looking for, son," suggesting either listening devices I cannot locate or sources of information I cannot identify, making our situation considerably more dangerous than even my partial explanation yesterday would indicate. Relief at finding the journal intact mixed with growing realization that whatever forces pursued his grandfather now focused on him with resources and determination beyond a 16-year-old boy's capacity to counter alone, desperation driving him to consider allies previously dismissed, possibilities previously overlooked. Scout suddenly appearing at the bedroom doorway with uncharacteristic whining, jumping against Lucas's leg before running toward the rear door. Behavior trained to indicate something requiring human attention beyond the dog's ability to address independently. Following Scout into the gathering darkness behind the cabin, Lucas found clear evidence of vehicle presence where none should exist. Tracks cutting across their property toward the Forest Service Road, distinctive tread pattern matching precisely those photographed on his phone after the midnight visitor's appearance. Scout leading him further into the tree line, where discarded packaging revealed sophisticated surveillance equipment installation requiring expertise beyond local resources, consistent with Vertex corporate capabilities, confirming connections between past and present intrusions while raising urgent questions about what specifically they sought and how much they knew about his discoveries. Possibilities that sent him hurrying back to the cabin with renewed determination to uncover the full truth his father still partially concealed behind warnings and vague explanations insufficient for the dangers now literally surrounding their isolated home. Dawn broke with Lucas already miles from the cabin, having left a hastily scrawled note for his father, explaining absence from school with deliberately vague references to research that would reveal nothing to potential observers, while providing Raymond enough context to understand his son's destination. Backpack containing essential supplies alongside the journal now recognized as both guide and liability, depending on who discovered its existence. Scout padding faithfully beside him as they followed game trails winding ever deeper into mountain wilderness, beyond cellular reception or satellite mapping, toward a location described in hushed tones by logging crews as Jenkins Folly, where his grandfather's oldest friend had retreated from civilization decades earlier following disputes with forestry officials over conservation practices. The journey consumed hours of careful navigation through increasingly dense forest unmarked by human presence, save occasional steel traps Jenkins maintained for sustenance and boundary marking, intentionally creating an approach difficult for casual hikers to penetrate yet recognizable to those specifically seeking the hermit's legendary wilderness sanctuary. Lucas following markers described in journal entries recording his grandfather's visits, rather than relying on unreliable rumors from townsfolk who considered the old forester more myth than man following his dramatic departure from conventional society. Midday sun filtered through ancient pines when Scout suddenly froze, ears forward, signaling presence ahead seconds before a gruff voice called from seamless camouflage among moss-covered boulders. "Wheeler blood travels with distinctive purpose, boy. Never meandering like tourists or hunting with ranger efficiency. Always direct like water finding downhill path despite obstacles." The speaker materializing from perfect concealment as an elderly man whose weathered face suggested decades exposed to elements. White beard reaching chest level above flannel shirt worn beneath handmade leather vest, eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows that had never known barber attention. Rifle held casually yet competently in hands gnarled from lifetime interacting with wilderness on its own unforgiving terms. Recognition flickered across Jenkins' features as Lucas approached, something between welcome and wariness as he gestured toward nearly invisible path leading toward smoke barely distinguishable from afternoon clouds. Thomas's grandson, finally seeking answers rather than avoiding questions. Timing suggesting circumstances grown urgent rather than curiosity finally overwhelming caution. The hermit's cabin defied conventional description. Structure seemingly grown from surrounding landscape rather than imposed upon it, walls incorporating living trees alongside hand-hewn timber, roof covered with vegetation rendering aerial observation nearly impossible. Interior surprisingly spacious and meticulously organized with books lining walls alongside topographical maps marked with annotations spanning decades of environmental observation. Jenkins studied Lucas with penetrating intensity while preparing tea from herbs gathered personally from surrounding forest, asking pointed questions about recent Vertex activities, Raymond's health, and specific details about the shelter Lucas had discovered, nodding with grim confirmation rather than surprise at responses indicating accelerating corporate interest following decades of patience now apparently exhausted. "Your grandfather mapped them all," Jenkins explained, unrolling yellowed parchment across rough-hewn table, revealing topographical representation of surrounding mountains with 7 locations marked in precise geometric pattern, impossible to discern without comprehensive overview. Sacred sites where the Ahwahnee believed worlds intersect, places containing power flowing from Earth's core through channels created when mountains formed millennia ago. Energy sought by many throughout history but protected by those understanding its nature requires respect rather than exploitation, balance rather than extraction. The old forester traced weathered finger across locations, explaining how generations of tribal guardians had preserved knowledge through carefully guarded oral tradition until circumstances forced alliance with sympathetic outsiders, capable of protecting sites using modern legal mechanisms. Unavailable to displaced indigenous people, Thomas Wheeler becoming final recipient of complete knowledge following Grey Bear's recognition of spiritual qualities transcending cultural boundaries, a responsibility that ultimately cost Lucas's grandfather freedom and nearly his life, when corporate interests discovered partial truth without comprehending complete consequences. Twilight descended upon the mountain as Jenkins continued examining the journal with reverent care, fingers exploring binding with practiced precision that suggested intimate familiarity with bookbinding techniques beyond casual knowledge, eventually locating nearly invisible stitching variation along spine, carefully separating layers of leather to extract yellowed parchment folded with mathematical precision to fit concealed compartments specifically designed for its protection and concealment. Thomas always favored redundancy in matters of importance, Jenkins explained, unfolding the delicate material with painstaking gentleness across the rough-hewn table, illuminated by kerosene lamps casting warm amber glow against cabin walls, lined with volumes suggesting scholarly pursuits at odds with the hermit's rustic appearance. Hiding fragments of knowledge in separate locations, ensuring complete understanding required collaborative effort rather than individual discovery. Pattern reflecting Ahwahnee belief that wisdom emerges from community rather than isolation despite my own contradictory lifestyle choices. The revealed map initially appeared simple, 7 locations marked with symbols matching those photographed in the shelter, but Jenkins guided Lucas through layers of meaning embedded within seemingly decorative elements. contour lines revealing underground water systems connecting sites, astronomical notations indicating seasonal alignment with celestial bodies, mathematical formulas calculating energy convergence patterns invisible to conventional observation methods, yet critical to understanding the system's true significance. Most striking was the central location marked with symbol Lucas had never encountered in his grandfather's writings. Elaborate interlocking design resembling both water source and solar radiation. Jenkins explaining in hushed tones usually reserved for religious observation, the source, nexus point where all energies converge, amplifying natural healing properties flowing through other sites. Location kept separate from primary documentation, because its discovery without proper preparation and intent guarantees exploitation rather than protection. Precise coordinates disguised within calculations appearing purely theoretical unless interpreted with knowledge passed through generations of guardians. Jenkins traced connection paths between sites, explaining how Vertex had discovered individual locations through conventional geological survey techniques, identifying unusual electromagnetic readings and mineral compositions defying scientific categorization. Corporate research eventually recognizing healing properties with pharmaceutical potential, yet fundamentally misunderstanding the interconnected nature, requiring holistic preservation rather than component extraction. They believe they seek miracle drug source, marketable medicine requiring only sophisticated extraction and processing. Corporate minds conceptualizing natural wonder in commercial framework limited by quarterly profit expectations and shareholder demands. Jenkins continued, voice hardening with conviction born from decades witnessing environmental exploitation justified through economic rationalization. But what flows through these mountains transcends commercial application. Energy neither created nor destroyed but channeled through ancient pathways formed when continents themselves shifted into current configuration. Power capable of healing broken bodies, or extending natural lifespans when approached with reverence and balance, yet equally capable of catastrophic consequence when forcibly extracted without understanding systemic relationships, maintaining equilibrium across entire mountain range. The old forester fixed Lucas with penetrating gaze, conveying decades of accumulated wisdom and warning simultaneously, adding with deliberate emphasis that raised hairs along Lucas's arms despite the cabin's comfortable warmth. Your grandfather understood Vertex executives had experienced healing themselves, personal miracle creating zealous pursuit transcending ordinary corporate motivation, explaining decades of persistent interest despite legal obstacles and public resistance, creating adversary far more dangerous than conventional mining operation, because driven by witnessed possibility rather than theoretical profit. Personal desperation, combining with commercial potential to justify whatever methods necessary to control what cannot and should not be owned by any single entity, particularly those viewing natural wonder through lens of market exclusivity and patent protection rather than collaborative stewardship protecting inherently communal resource. Monday morning found Lucas arriving at school with deliberate determination, bypassing his regular classes to head directly toward the library during early period when Miss Caldwell typically worked alone organizing returns before student traffic began. Scout reluctantly left at home despite Lucas's desire for the comfort of his companion as he confronted impossibilities demanding explanation beyond rational framework. The librarian glanced up with professional smile that faltered momentarily upon recognizing Lucas's expression, something beyond teenage defiance or academic purpose reflected in eyes that had witnessed too much truth in too short a time frame to maintain comfortable illusions about his world or those inhabiting it, tension immediately filling the space between them as he silently placed his phone on her desk, screen displaying the 30-year-old newspaper photograph, capturing her unchanged face among protesters who had subsequently fallen ill while opposing Vertex operations. Interesting historical artifact, she commented with practiced casualness belied by subtle shifting positioning herself between Lucas and the exit, though hardly relevant to your local history project, unless pursuing journalistic angle on corporate environmental conflict spanning decades. Lucas remained silent, adding beside the phone his grandfather's journal open to entries describing the ageless one who walks between guardian generations, witness to centuries of protection and betrayal, bound to the source through ritual predating written history. watching recognition transform her features from professional mask to something ancient and weary beyond human experience. Calculation visibly shifting toward decision that manifested as resigned exhalation followed by deliberate movement toward library doors, locking them with quiet finality, before gesturing Lucas toward her private office normally forbidden to students. Inside the small room, bookshelves held volumes whose leather bindings and foreign scripts suggested origins far removed from standard academic texts. Artifacts arranged with museum precision displayed symbols matching those from the shelter, alongside photographs spanning historical periods showing Miss Caldwell in unchanged form, beside different generations of tribal guardians, most recently Gray Bear and Thomas Wheeler in images Lucas recognized from his grandfather's personal belongings preserved in family storage. Immortality sounds more appealing in fictional accounts than lived experience, she began, voice carrying cadences suggesting linguistic patterns evolved through centuries of adaptation, witnessing loved ones age and perish while remaining unchanging, responsibility extending beyond natural human time frame, blessing becoming burden as decades transform into centuries with no release except through successful transference of guardianship to worthy successor. Transition your grandfather was undergoing when vertex interference disrupted ancient ritual. She explained her original role among Ahwani ancestors centuries earlier, chosen during ritual when the source manifested healing powers saving tribal members from devastating illness, process transforming her into ageless guardian responsible for preserving knowledge across generations, training successive protectors while maintaining appearance of normal aging through periodic relocation and identity changes. Thomas Wheeler representing first non-tribal guardian candidate in centuries until Vertex executives experienced accidental healing at one site, launching obsessive pursuit of power they experienced but couldn't understand. Your grandfather isn't dead, Lucas, she revealed, unlocking cabinet containing familiar tribal artifacts alongside modern scientific instruments, monitoring electromagnetic frequencies, but exists between worlds, trapped during interrupted ritual intended to establish permanent protection boundary around the source, conscious yet unable to fully manifest in physical realm, preserved by same energies he sought to protect while simultaneously prevented from completing guardianship transfer that would release both him and me from centuries-long obligation that has become increasingly unsustainable as modern technology renders concealment nearly impossible and corporate resources overwhelm traditional protections established in simpler times. Lucas returned home that afternoon to find unfamiliar vehicle parked beside their cabin, heart immediately accelerating as he approached cautiously until recognizing Dr. Reynolds's modest sedan rather than corporate transport, relief transforming to renewed anxiety upon entering to discover his father slumped in wheelchair looking decades older than mere hours before, skin ashen with alarming grayish undertone, breathing labored between coughing spasms that produced handkerchief spots. Lucas instantly recognized as blood despite Reynolds's attempt to position himself between father and son, while explaining medical terminology designed obscure rather than clarify the seriousness of Raymond Wheeler's deterioration. These mountain conditions exacerbate his condition, Reynolds stated with professional concern underlined by urgency as he packed his medical bag, stethoscope hanging around neck like serpentine reminder of medical authority, rarely questioned by rural patients raised to respect doctoral expertise without verification. The specialized facility I've recommended since initial diagnosis now represents his only viable treatment option. Their experimental protocols showing promising results for similar cases documented in recent literature. Financial considerations no longer relevant, given compassionate care provisions recently extended to qualifying patients. Lucas watched his father's eyes during this explanation, noting resignation, suggesting previous arguments conducted during his absence, wheelchair positioned facing window rather than engaging directly with medical discussion, occurring literally behind his back. Visible tremors running through once powerful hands now curled inward like withering leaves, preparing detachment from life-giving branch. Reynolds continued with rehearsed smoothness, suggesting corporate talking points rather than independent medical assessment, removing from his bag intake forms bearing Vertex Research Division letterhead identical to medication bottles hidden in Raymond's nightstand. Facility address matching location documented in grandfather's journal entries, describing protesters' mysterious ailments following confrontation with company security personnel. Transportation has been arranged for tomorrow morning, Reynolds added, placing forms on kitchen table while avoiding direct eye contact with Lucas, focusing instead on medication adjustment that sent Raymond into immediate drowsiness despite previous tolerance for significantly higher dosages. Suspicious convenience, allowing doctor to address son without paternal interference, adding with lowered voice, "Your father's condition follows predictable progression requiring specialized intervention beyond conventional medical resources. Genetic factors suggesting potential vulnerability you might eventually share without preventative protocols available only through research division participation." Lucas maintained neutral expression despite internal turmoil, thanking doctor with appropriate teenage awkwardness while accepting literature describing facility with glossy photographs showing smiling patients and state-of-the-art equipment, waiting until headlights disappeared down Mountain Road before hurrying to retrieve journal from hiding place. Frantically searching entries describing protest participants' symptoms with growing horror, recognizing exact progression now manifesting in his father, metallic taste preceding respiratory deterioration, followed by distinctive blood patterns, neurological symptoms developing precisely 48 hours after initial presentation, timing suggesting deliberate intensification of previously controlled condition rather than natural disease progression. Raymond's medications apparently designed to manage symptoms without addressing underlying cause. Maintenance protocol suddenly withdrawn following Lucas's discovery of connections Raymond had concealed through misdirection and outright deception, motivated by paternal protection rather than collusion with forces that had effectively imprisoned him through pharmaceutical dependency, more effectively than physical restraints ever could. With his father drifting in medicated sleep, Lucas slipped from the cabin under cover of darkness, navigating familiar trails by moonlight with desperate urgency driving him toward Jenkins' hidden sanctuary, arriving breathless as false dawn began illuminating eastern ridgelines. The old forester already awake and seemingly expecting his arrival with steaming tea and grave expression, suggesting awareness of circumstances through mountain connections transcending conventional communication. "Your father's condition has accelerated," Jenkins stated rather than asked, gesturing Lucas toward rough-hewn chair beside glowing wood stove that provided cabin's only heat against early morning mountain chill. "Vertex adjusting their timeline in response to your discoveries, leveraging pharmaceutical dependency they created specifically to control Raymond after your grandfather's sacrifice disrupted their original acquisition plans." Lucas described his father's symptoms and Reynolds' arrangement for transfer to Vertex facility, Jenkins listening with increasing concern before retrieving ancient leather pouch containing sacred herbs that he carefully added to water heating over fire, explaining in measured tones that suggested information passed through countless generations of oral tradition. The Awani understood nothing valuable comes without exchange, cosmic balance requiring sacrifice proportional to benefit received, wisdom applied to healing energies flowing through mountain pathways connecting sacred sites to source at center, power available to those approaching with appropriate reverence and acceptance of corresponding cost. The old forester described tribal healing ceremonies conducted over centuries, practitioners accepting physical limitation or shortened lifespan in exchange for curing grievous injuries or terminal conditions afflicting tribal members. Balance maintaining harmonious relationship with energies neither created nor destroyed, but channeled through ancient geological formations predating human habitation. System functioning perfectly until outside interests discovered effects without understanding causes or accepting corresponding responsibilities. Your grandfather performed ritual sacrifice 30 years ago, Jenkins continued, voice lowering reverentially while preparing medicine bundle, whose purpose remained unexplained, yet clearly significant, based on careful attention to specific component proportions, offering himself as guardian trapped between physical and spirit realms. Existence neither fully living nor completely departed, maintaining boundary preventing Vertex from locating source while simultaneously experiencing consciousness beyond normal human limitation. Bargain accepted by mountain forces in exchange for protection continuing until natural transfer to subsequent guardian could occur. The explanation continued as Jenkins worked, describing how Thomas Wheeler's sacrifice had created protective barrier, disrupting Vertex's instruments and confounding their research efforts for decades. Corporate determination eventually developing alternative approaches, including systematically afflicting Raymond with condition treatable only through medications, creating dependency, ensuring compliance, symptoms artificially managed until recent events triggered deliberate withdrawal, intended forcing Lucas toward desperate choices involving cabin property, containing access point to sacred site. Your father's illness represents weakening of your grandfather's sacrifice, Jenkins explained with grave certainty, securing medicine bundle with intricate knotwork pattern matching symbols from shelter walls. Balance disturbed by Vertex's renewed efforts, breaching protective boundaries. Raymond's condition directly connected to dimensional thinning occurring as your grandfather's energy depletes after decades maintaining separation between worlds without proper ritual reinforcement or successor appointment. Symptoms manifesting physically through biological vulnerability, deliberately exploited through pharmaceutical manipulation rather than natural disease progression. Understanding crashed through Lucas with devastating clarity, connections forming between his grandfather's disappearance, his father's mysterious illness predating logging accident, and his own recent discovery of shelter and journal, timeline suggesting not coincidence but orchestrated pattern, spanning generations of Wheeler men connected to mountain mysteries through bloodline and circumstance. Knowledge bringing responsibility that transcended normal teenage concerns, with implications potentially involving sacrifice comparable to his grandfather's ongoing imprisonment between dimensional boundaries, choice now looming that would determine not only his father's immediate survival, but continuation of protections maintaining natural balance against corporate exploitation, threatening consequences beyond Vertex's limited understanding of forces they sought to control through scientific methodology, inadequate for comprehending spiritual energies interwoven through mountains' ancient geological composition. The tense negotiation with Mrs. Whitefeather consumed precious hours Lucas could scarcely afford, with his father scheduled for facility transfer the following morning. The elderly woman initially refusing participation in ritual she considered dangerous without proper preparation and spiritual centering, relenting only when Lucas produced Jenkins' medicine bundle containing sacred herbs and ceremonial items she recognized as properly prepared by someone versed in traditional knowledge, her weathered face showing conflicted emotions before finally nodding agreement while warning, "What you seek requires opening pathways normally sealed for protection." Glimpsing realms humans were not designed to witness directly. Experience potentially leaving permanent marks upon your spirit regardless of physical outcome. Preparations continued as sunset yielded to full moonrise, Mrs. Whitefeather instructing Lucas to gather specific items from the cabin, including something belonging to both his father and grandfather. Scout left behind, despite Lucas's reluctance. The wise woman explaining animals sometimes reacted unpredictably to dimensional thinning occurring during such ceremonies, potentially disrupting delicate energy alignments necessary for successful communication across realms. They approached the shelter as moonlight bathed the mountain in silvery illumination that transformed familiar landscape into otherworldly terrain, where shadows held unusual depth and ordinary sounds seemed muted by expectant silence. Mrs. Whitefeather creating sacred circle using materials from Jenkins' bundle, while softly chanting in language Lucas recognized from his grandfather's phonetic transcriptions, positioning him at circle's center, where shelter entrance aligned perfectly with moonlight streaming through forest canopy. The ritual began with burning of sacred herbs whose smoke carried distinctive sweetness unlike anything Lucas had experienced. Instructions to breathe deeply while focusing on mental image of his grandfather formed from photographs and childhood memories. Mrs. Whitefeather's voice gradually fading as Lucas felt unusual lightness spreading through his limbs, followed by sensation of floating slightly above physical form, while remaining anchored by invisible connection to his seated body. Disorientation yielded to clarity unlike ordinary consciousness, perceptions extending beyond normal limitations as shelter walls seemed to dissolve, revealing landscape simultaneously familiar yet fundamentally altered, colors visible beyond normal spectrum, sounds carrying information rather than mere vibration. Reality transformed into multi-layered experience, where past and present existed simultaneously rather than sequentially. Within this altered perception appeared his grandfather, Thomas Wheeler, not as elderly man who had vanished decades earlier, but vibrant presence existing within shadowy boundary realm, neither fully physical nor completely spiritual, awareness evident in eyes that registered recognition. Upon perceiving Lucas's presence across dimensional barrier, temporarily thinned by ritual components and celestial alignment. Communication occurred without words, understanding flowing directly between consciousnesses temporarily connected through bloodline and ceremonial context. Lucas perceiving his grandfather's trapped existence, maintaining protective field through continuous exertion of will, preventing Vertex from locating source center, simultaneously witnessing corporate intentions through grandfather's accumulated observations spanning decades, witnessing laboratories where extracted energy underwent transformation into pharmaceutical compounds, providing healing without corresponding sacrifice, creating fundamental imbalance within natural systems while offering exclusive benefits to wealthy clients, capable of affording treatments derived from freely given mountain gifts, process inherently unsustainable yet driven by market logic, recognizing value while rejecting responsibility. The vision expanded, showing catastrophic consequences should Vertex succeed. Ecological devastation spreading through interconnected energy channels as extraction without replenishment, depleted ancient systems, sustaining entire mountain ecosystem, grandfather's sacrifice increasingly insufficient against technological advances and corporate determination. Alternate future crystallizing where Lucas perceived his own potential role, continuing protection through sacrifice similar to grandfather's imprisonment, or discovering alternative balancing mechanism preserving natural systems while addressing immediate threat to his father's deteriorating condition, contradictory responsibilities between family obligation and larger protective role, creating impossible choice before vision abruptly terminated as Mrs. Whitefeather broke ceremonial circle, urgently whispering, "They come." They sensed the opening between worlds, hurriedly gathering ritual components while instructing Lucas to move despite his disorientation. Distant flashlight beams visible through trees, confirming unwelcome approach, potentially threatening both their safety and secrecy surrounding ceremony, whose effects continued reverberating through Lucas's consciousness long after physical components ended. Dawn found Lucas returning to the shelter alone despite Mrs. Whitefeather's warnings against revisiting the site so soon after ritual exposure. Desperate need for answers overriding caution as his father's scheduled transfer approached with unstoppable momentum. Determination to understand his grandfather's experience driving him back to the place where dimensional boundaries had momentarily thinned, revealing truths beyond ordinary perception, yet insufficient for formulating practical response to immediate crisis threatening his only remaining parent. The shelter entrance appeared undisturbed despite their hasty retreat from approaching searches the previous night. Lucas carefully checking surrounding forest before slipping inside with flashlight, illuminating ancient symbols now carrying deeper significance, following ceremonial insights, their patterns suggesting connections previously overlooked between geological formations and energy channels flowing beneath mountain surface, according to maps partially decoded through combined knowledge from multiple sources. So focused was his attention on these details that presence behind him registered only when shadow fell across illuminated wall, turning to discover missed presence. Caldwell standing in entrance with expression combining triumph and regret in proportions suggesting internal conflict resolved through difficult decision. Her hand holding not librarian's reading glasses but sleek device emitting soft blue light that swept across shelter interior in scanning pattern suggesting technological sophistication beyond consumer electronics. "You show remarkable resourcefulness for someone so young," she commented with clinical assessment rather than genuine admiration, positioning herself to block exit while maintaining careful distance, reaching accurate conclusions despite deliberately misleading information and navigating complex situations with intuitive understanding your grandfather similarly demonstrated. Family trait proving simultaneously admirable and problematic across generations of Wheeler men pursuing truth regardless of personal consequence. Lucas backed against far wall, mind racing through escape possibilities while processing betrayal from a parent ally who continued speaking with conversational tone, belying situational tension. explaining her centuries-spanning guardianship beginning with noble intentions gradually eroded through endless witnessing of human suffering, potentially addressable through controlled application of Mountain's healing properties. Isolation of immortality, creating perspective increasingly removed from conventional morality, with each passing generation of short-lived companions aging and perishing while she continued unchanged beyond natural lifespan. Thomas understood the potential for controlled application without complete exploitation. She continued, activating communication device, summoning unseen associates waiting nearby. Balance, preserving source while allowing beneficial utilization rather than rigid prohibition or unrestricted extraction. Middle path. Your grandfather and I were developing before tribal fundamentalists intervened with outdated preservation demands, forcing difficult decisions resulting in his current unfortunate state that need not continue given your cooperation with more pragmatic approach. Vertex now pursues under my guidance. The betrayal crystallized with devastating clarity. Lucas, recognizing manipulation extending from apparent discovery of shelter, deliberately left accessible following subtle direction through school research project toward specific historical sources, manufactured coincidences, engineered to create illusion of independent investigation while actually following precisely choreographed path designed leading him toward conclusions, serving her purposes. Genuine aspects of his grandfather's journal acquiring new context, suggesting partial truths woven through authentic documentation, creating narrative supporting her agenda while concealing deeper manipulations spanning decades. Immortality without purpose becomes unbearable prison, she stated with first genuine emotion breaking through calculated exterior. Centuries watching civilizations rise and fall while maintaining secret knowledge increasingly irrelevant within modern world capable of processing natural resources through scientific methods rather than spiritual rituals. Burden I no longer wish, bearing alone when alternative exists, benefiting humanity through structured application rather than supernatural superstition. Choice your grandfather understood before interference trapped him between realms where neither proper existence nor peaceful ending remains possible. Fate awaiting your father through connection you discovered in journal regarding bloodline susceptibility to dimensional energy exposure, and condition treatable through precisely calibrated application, available exclusively through Vertex protocols originally developed under my direction, across centuries of accumulated knowledge, translated into contemporary scientific framework. Your grandfather hoped to perfect before his unfortunate interdimensional imprisonment. The journey to Vertex's facility passed in uncomfortable silence. Lucas seated between security personnel in unmarked vehicle with windows tinted beyond legal limits. Miss Caldwell following in separate transport as convoy wound along unmarked Forest Service roads before turning onto camouflaged access path, invisible from main thoroughfare, eventually arriving at Mountainside seemingly unremarkable, until massive door disguised as natural rock face slid sideways, revealing entrance to facility carved directly into Mountain's heart. Scale suggesting construction spanning decades rather than recent development. Confirmation of long-term corporate investment pursuing goal transcending ordinary profit motivation. Security protocols processed Lucas through series of checkpoints with clinical efficiency. Biometric scanners recording measurements, while technicians collected blood samples with explanation regarding necessary baseline establishment before potential exposure to environmental conditions requiring monitoring. Terminology suggesting scientific framework masking underlying reality. Lucas had glimpsed during ritual connection with his trapped grandfather. Deeper, they progressed into labyrinthine complex whose architecture incorporated natural cavern systems expanded through precision mining techniques, preserving critical geological formations, conveying energy pathways from sacred sites toward central collection facility. Walls embedded with monitoring equipment, displaying real-time measurements of fluctuations corresponding to lunar cycles and atmospheric conditions affecting dimensional boundary integrity. Data points matching precisely descriptions from his grandfather's journal regarding natural rhythms governing energy flow through mountain systems. The central laboratory revealed truth beyond Lucas's darkest expectations. Massive chamber constructed around geological formation matching exactly the source symbol from concealed map. Crystalline core pulsing with opalescent energy harvested through extraction equipment, connected to distribution system feeding experimental treatment pods, where subjects ranging from elderly corporate executives to terminal patients underwent rejuvenation procedures calibrated, delivering precise dosages without corresponding sacrifice required by traditional methods. Imbalance, visibly manifesting through monitoring stations, displaying environmental impacts, including progressive deadening of forest regions surrounding extraction points, wildlife population collapse in affected areas, fundamental disruption of natural systems extending well beyond property boundaries into surrounding national forest-designated wilderness areas. Most disturbing were historical displays documenting facility development, including photographs showing Raymond Wheeler among white-coated researchers during early experimental phases, Lucas's father appearing decades younger, working alongside team developing extraction methodology before abruptly disappearing from chronological record precisely when unexpected side effects began manifesting. Supporting documentation revealing Raymond's growing ethical concerns regarding environmental impacts and dimensional boundary destabilization, internal communications recommending project suspension pending further assessment, final research notes indicating whistleblower intention, prompting corporate classification as security risk, subject to compassionate containment protocol, referenced in patient files, revealing systematic administration of compounds simultaneously treating exposure symptoms while creating dependency, ensuring compliance through medical necessity. Your father chose poorly. Carrington materialized beside Lucas, corporate executive's appearance suggesting recent rejuvenation treatment, enhancing natural aging reversal beyond conventional medical possibility, continuing with professional detachment masking underlying menace, abandoning promising research career upon discovering personal ethical boundaries regarding resource utilization methodology, choosing outdated preservation paradigm over progressive application model, decision ultimately rendering him dependent upon very treatments he morally opposed, irony apparently lost on man whose scientific brilliance we continue valuing, despite philosophical disagreements regarding implementation parameters and acceptable environmental externalities, balancing individual benefit against ecosystem. Impact valuation metrics applied, determining appropriate utilization thresholds within sustainable extraction framework, continuously refined through ongoing research, incorporating subject response data, including specifically valuable Wheeler family genetic markers demonstrating unusual receptivity to interdimensional energies without requiring extensive preparatory conditioning typical within general population samples. The facility tour continued with clinical detachment, Carrington explaining extraction methodologies with corporate enthusiasm, masking environmental devastation clearly documented on monitoring stations. Lucas maintaining facade of cooperative interest while desperately seeking escape opportunity from underground complex, seemingly designed specifically preventing unauthorized departure. Security personnel positioned at strategic intervals throughout interconnected chambers housing various research divisions focused on different aspects of interdimensional energy application. The unexpected alarm sounded precisely 40 minutes into detailed explanation of molecular reconfiguration processes, claxons echoing through laboratory spaces accompanied by flashing indicators signaling perimeter breach of significance, sufficient triggering facility-wide security protocols. Carrington immediately summoned toward command center while instructing subordinates to secure Lucas within observation room until situation resolved, door locking automatically behind departing personnel, leaving him momentarily unattended yet securely contained within glass-walled space overlooking primary research area. The security monitor within this temporary prison provided unexpected information source, displaying multiple camera feeds, tracking unfolding situation near facility entrance, where somehow, impossibly, Scout had followed transport vehicles through mountain passages. The Border Collie's uncanny intelligence, combined with preternatural tracking abilities, bringing him precisely where Lucas most needed assistance, creating magnificent chaos as security personnel attempted corralling animal, demonstrating surprising effectiveness, evading capture, while systematically triggering additional alarms through seemingly deliberate interaction with emergency equipment, behavior suggesting intelligence beyond normal canine capacity, as if guided by something beyond ordinary animal consciousness. Seizing opportunity created through division of security resources, Lucas quickly examined research materials left accessible on observation room workstation, rapidly scanning classified documents revealing devastating operational plans scheduled implementation within 72 hours. Coordinated activation of extraction technology at all 7 sacred sites simultaneously, exponentially increasing energy harvest beyond previous capacity through synchronized dimensional thinning across entire network. Process projected yielding unprecedented quantity of refined material for exclusive treatment program while acknowledging acceptable environmental impact including complete forest die-off within 50-mile radius, groundwater contamination affecting watershed serving 3 states, and potential dimensional instability classified as manageable disruption, despite accompanying models showing catastrophic consequences extending far beyond corporate property boundaries into surrounding communities, including his own mountain home. Most disturbing discovery came through architectural schematics, revealing observation room's ventilation system connecting directly with maintenance shaft, providing potential escape route if access panel beneath workstation could be removed without triggering additional security alerts, timing critical as Scout's distraction would inevitably conclude through either capture or escape. Limited opportunity requiring immediate action regardless of potential consequences. Using access card carelessly left by departing researcher, Lucas activated workstation's document printer, creating secondary distraction through system accessing confidential files, triggering authorization verification process, routing automatic notification to security personnel already occupied with Scout's ongoing disruption, momentarily overriding observation room surveillance while he frantically dismantled ventilation access panel using multi-tool fortuitously overlooked during initial security processing, slipping into narrow maintenance shaft precisely as security personnel returned investigating workstation alert, crawling through claustrophobic ductwork navigating complex path through facility infrastructure, guided by memorized sections of emergency evacuation maps, glimpsed during earlier escort through research sections. The maintenance shaft eventually opened into service tunnel designed providing emergency exit from underground complex. Lucas, emerging into forest considerably distant from main entrance where Scout miraculously awaited, as if anticipating precisely where his human companion would appear. Reunion momentarily overshadowed by urgent knowledge regarding imminent threat to entire mountain ecosystem and realization that whatever force guided his loyal companion's impossible tracking and strategically effective disruption. Suggested powers operating beyond ordinary explanation, potentially connected to his grandfather's interdimensional presence, glimpsed during ritual ceremony that had forever altered Lucas's perception of reality and his place within increasingly complex conflict between corporate exploitation and ancient protective traditions, his bloodline now represented through 3 generations of Wheeler men. Dawn broke over the mountain as Lucas stumbled into Jenkins' cabin with Scout at his heels. Physical exhaustion overshadowed by urgent purpose driving him forward despite hours spent navigating wilderness following facility escape. The old forester and Mrs. Whitefeather already waiting as if somehow aware of developments requiring immediate response. Their faces grave as Lucas detailed Vertex's planned simultaneous activation scheduled precisely coinciding with summer solstice occurring in less than 36 hours, when natural dimensional thinning would amplify extraction. Effectiveness while minimizing energy required breaching boundaries normally restricting access to interdimensional resources. Jenkins immediately contacted former Forest Service colleagues, still maintaining environmental monitoring stations throughout the region, providing technical specifications regarding anticipated disruption patterns, potentially registering as seismic anomalies, justifying emergency investigation, while Mrs. Whitefeather attempted engaging tribal authorities through official channels established under cultural preservation statutes, both avenues quickly revealing Vertex's influence extending throughout regional governance structures with concerning thoroughness. Responses ranging from polite dismissal to barely concealed hostility, suggesting coordinated preparation, neutralizing potential interference from traditional oversight mechanisms. Corporate tendrils reached deeper than anticipated. Jenkins observed grimly after sixth consecutive call encountering bureaucratic stonewalling from agencies theoretically responsible for environmental protection, suggesting preparation spanning decades rather than months. Systematic cultivation of strategic relationships, ensuring operational security, regardless of regulatory framework, theoretically preventing precisely such exploitation. Further attempts contacting national media encountered similar resistance. Communications mysteriously disconnecting or receiving responses, indicating assignment to research teams guaranteed, ensuring information burial beneath editorial oversight, prioritizing advertising relationships with Vertex's parent corporation, confirmation that conventional intervention channels had been methodically neutralized through combination of financial influence and strategic personnel placement. Lucas returned briefly to their cabin, finding his father surprisingly alert despite missing scheduled treatment transfer, Raymond Wheeler grimly determined following Scout's unexplained appearance, delivering crumpled facility documents Lucas had secured during escape. Detailed extraction plans confirming suspicions harbored since original research participation decades earlier. Newfound clarity regarding corporate intentions, overwhelming pharmaceutical dependency through paternal protective instinct activated by undeniable evidence threatening his son's future and mountain homeland. "I helped create this abomination," Raymond stated flatly upon Lucas's arrival. Wheelchair positioned facing window overlooking forest, showing early signs of energetic disruption through subtly altered wildlife behavior patterns recognized by experienced woodsmen despite physical limitations. Scientific curiosity blinding me to ethical implications until discovering boundary destabilization potential. Responsibility now demanding participation, addressing consequences regardless of personal cost. Jenkins outlined desperate counter-strategy developed alongside Mrs. Whitefeather during Lucas's absence, leveraging combined knowledge from traditional tribal wisdom and modern technical understanding regarding dimensional boundary mechanics. Plan requiring coordinated disruption across multiple sacred sites preceding solstice alignment, when Vertex would attempt simultaneous activation. Necessity positioning individuals at critical locations performing ceremonial blocking rituals temporarily reinforcing natural boundaries, while Lucas would attempt reaching central source location where his grandfather maintained protective presence. Theoretical possibility existing combining Wheeler bloodline connection with ceremonial components, potentially reinforcing Thomas's interdimensional barrier, sufficiently preventing catastrophic extraction temporarily until permanent solution could be developed. Lucas watched his father's determination grow, listening to increasingly dangerous plan involving sites scattered across rugged terrain largely inaccessible except through strenuous hiking beyond Raymond's current physical capacity, yet understanding necessity transcending individual limitation when Mrs. Whitefeather quietly revealed, "Your father's condition stabilized temporarily through mountain connection, awakening within Wheeler bloodline facing existential threat." Phenomenon documented through generations of tribal guardians witnessing similar manifestation when ancient powers recognize worthy defenders arising from necessity. Gift permitting participation despite physical deterioration, though carrying significant potential cost through energy expenditure beyond normal human capacity to sustain without corresponding restoration, currently unavailable while source remains under corporate threat. The journey began before daybreak. Jenkins' ancient truck carrying them along Forest Service roads while Scout served as advance scout detecting potential security patrols. Mrs. Whitefeather clutching medicine pouch containing ceremonial components required for ritual performance at each sacred site. Raymond seated beside her with expression combining determination and disbelief as physical strength gradually returned through mysterious connection with mountain energies. Transformation visibly accelerating as they approached first sacred site marked on concealed map, hidden within journal binding. Access required abandoning motorized transport 2 miles from initial destination, makeshift travois constructed, enabling Raymond's mobility across terrain too rugged for conventional wheelchair. Group, moving with practiced stealth, developed through lifetimes, spent navigating wilderness, now transformed into contested territory, where natural challenges competed with human security measures for greatest obstacle to their desperate mission. The first site revealed evidence of Vertex preparation, sophisticated equipment installed surrounding ancient stone formation, whose natural configuration channeled underground energy currents, Jenkins quickly identifying critical components vulnerable to disruption, while Lucas and Mrs. Whitefeather prepared ceremonial elements, establishing temporary barrier, reinforcing dimensional boundaries weakened through corporate interference. Process completed barely 20 minutes before security patrols' scheduled arrival, according to operational timetable discovered during Lucas's facility infiltration. Raymond's condition transformed dramatically during ritual performance. Decades of illness visibly receding as molecular structure realigned through proximity to sacred energies, standing unassisted for first time since logging accident while contributing knowledge regarding equipment vulnerabilities based on research experience, predating corporate betrayal and subsequent imprisonment through pharmaceutical dependency. Each successive site journey presented unique challenges. Second location requiring stream crossing during unseasonal flooding, likely resulting from energy disruption affecting weather patterns. Third, positioned precariously along exposed ridge, necessitating nighttime approach, avoiding surveillance drones patrolling daylight hours. Fourth, hidden within cave system requiring technical climbing skills. Jenkins demonstrated with surprising agility belying advanced age. Group working with increasing efficiency as shared purpose, transcended individual limitations through collective determination, preserving mountain ecosystem against corporate exploitation, threatening centuries of natural balance. Most remarkable transformation occurred within Lucas himself. Each ritual performance strengthening connection with his grandfather's interdimensional presence. Communication progressing from vague impressions toward coherent information transfer, conveying critical knowledge regarding source locations, defensive capabilities Thomas Wheeler had established during original sacrifice. Complex information regarding dimensional mechanics, transcending conventional scientific understanding while simultaneously confirming theoretical frameworks Raymond had developed during early research, before ethical concerns prompted corporate classification as security threat requiring neutralization. Scout demonstrated increasingly unusual abilities throughout journey, anticipating security patrol movements before visible or audible evidence manifested, leading group through concealed approaches invisible on topographical maps, yet precisely aligned with ancient travel routes documented in tribal oral tradition. Mrs. Whitefeather recognized from ceremonial teachings, behavior suggesting animal consciousness accessing awareness beyond ordinary canine perception, potentially connected with Lucas's grandfather's expanded interdimensional presence, monitoring their progress through means transcending physical limitation. The sixth site presented greatest challenge, Vertex Security establishing permanent observation post monitoring ancient standing stones whose configuration marked penultimate energy convergence point critical to network functioning, requiring coordinated distraction. Jenkins orchestrated through strategic forest fire ignition, safely distant from critical habitat, while simultaneously drawing security personnel from position, enabling brief ceremonial performance. Completed moments before automated monitoring equipment restored functionality. Following suspicious power fluctuation, Raymond engineered exploiting technical knowledge from previous research involvement. Throughout arduous journey consuming precious hours before solstice alignment, Raymond's strengthening continued proportionally with Lucas's deepening connection to his grandfather, father and son experiencing parallel transformations through separate yet interlinked processes, suggesting coordinated purpose beyond conscious understanding, while Mrs. Whitefeather observed with knowing expression, suggesting witnessed phenomenon confirming ancient teachings regarding bloodline guardianship, transcending generations through mysterious mechanisms defying conventional explanation yet demonstrably real through physical manifestation, transforming dying man into capable defender, standing increasingly straight while approaching final confrontation at source location, where ultimate challenge awaited beyond ceremonial. Preparations completed across mountain landscape now temporarily protected against immediate exploitation, yet remaining vulnerable to concentrated corporate effort, planned coinciding precisely with solstice alignment, rapidly approaching as group rested briefly before final approach toward mountain's heart, where Wheeler family destiny awaited resolution, transcending individual lives through connection with forces older than humanity itself. The final sacred site lay concealed beneath ancient rock formation resembling natural arch, unless viewed precisely at solstice sunrise when alignment revealed entrance accessible only during specific celestial configuration. Location representing culmination of energy pathways flowing through previous sites before converging towards source at mountain's heart. Significance, unmistakable through massive vertex security presence, establishing perimeter armed personnel, could not penetrate through conventional approach. Jenkins identified concealed service entrance utilized during equipment installation, pathway requiring technical climbing skills, challenging even without Raymond's recent physical improvement. Group advancing methodically through darkness while Scout navigated point position with uncanny awareness of security patrol timing, suggesting continued connection with forces beyond ordinary perception. The central chamber revealed technological marvel blending cutting-edge science with fundamental misunderstanding of forces being manipulated. Massive extraction apparatus constructed surrounding crystalline formation, pulsing with opalescent energy visible across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Dimensional boundary visibly thinned through corporate interference, creating translucent effect where solid matter appeared simultaneously substantial and immaterial depending viewing angle and mental preparation. Standing within chamber already representing significant dimensional displacement from normal reality. Miss Caldwell awaited their arrival with expression suggesting inevitability rather than surprise. Surrounded by Vertex executives, including Carrington, whose ageless appearance testified to treatments already received through preliminary extraction operations. Security personnel positioning themselves strategically throughout chamber while maintaining respectful distance from apparatus, whose energy fluctuations clearly presented hazard beyond conventional understanding despite corporate confidence displayed through experimental activation sequence already initiated, preparing solstice alignment, maximizing extraction potential. The Wheeler family demonstrates remarkable persistence across generations. Miss Caldwell observed with clinical detachment, masking centuries accumulated weariness. Consistently choosing preservationist approaches despite opportunities embracing progressive utilization methodologies, offering quantifiable benefits through controlled application rather than supernatural prohibition. Raymond stepped forward with surprising confidence. Physical transformation now complete through proximity to source energies, reverberating through blood connection established generations earlier. Addressing assembled executives with professional authority, momentarily confusing corporate hierarchy, accustomed commanding rather than receiving operational assessment. Your extraction methodology remains fundamentally flawed despite modifications implemented following my departure. Calibration algorithms, systematically corrupted through subtle code manipulation, introduced during development phase, continuing through subsequent updates via maintenance protocols I established before recognizing ethical implications. Necessitating opposition. Technical explanation continued, revealing Raymond's methodical sabotage spanning decades, failsafes embedded within operational systems designed triggering cascading failures when extraction exceeded sustainable parameters. Corporate confidence based upon compromised data, deliberately structured, providing false readings, confirming theoretical models while concealing critical boundary instability factors whose miscalculation guaranteed catastrophic system failure proportional to extraction volume. Information shocking executives whose insurance strategies had overlooked internal sabotage possibility from scientifically brilliant yet ethically motivated researcher playing decades-long strategy, culminating precisely at moment corporate confidence approached absolute certainty. Carrington recovered quickly, signaling technicians implementing secondary protocols bypassing standard operational sequences while simultaneously revealing technology previously concealed even from privileged observers. Apparatus extending throughout chamber, connecting directly with dimensional boundary through methodology, violating fundamental principles guiding traditional interactions with sacred energies. Brute force approach, extracting resources without ceremonial preparation or corresponding sacrifice, normally maintaining cosmic balance. Mrs. Whitefeather, visibly shuddering, witnessing desecration centuries guardianship had prevented, while Lucas experienced overwhelming connection with his grandfather's consciousness as boundary thinning intensified through technological intervention. Thomas Wheeler's presence strengthening proportionally with corporate violation, increasing dimensional permeability beyond designed parameters. situation approaching critical threshold where Raymond's sabotage would trigger while simultaneously creating opportunity, Vertex had inadvertently engineered through fundamental misunderstanding regarding Wheeler bloodlines, significance within ancient protection methodology, extending beyond corporate comprehension. Despite scientific arrogance, believing technological superiority transcended natural limitations governing energetic systems older than humanity itself. The activation sequence initiated with mechanical precision despite Raymond's warnings. Vertex executives demonstrating unwavering commitment to extraction schedule, regardless of potential consequences. Corporate confidence overriding scientific caution through profit motivation, transcending rational risk assessment. Technicians monitoring systems reporting optimal functionality, contradicting Raymond's claims regarding sabotage effectiveness until initial energy surge produced unexpected readings momentarily dismissed as calibration anomalies, rather than fundamental warning signs. Lucas felt his grandfather's presence strengthening proportionally with extraction intensity, dimensional boundary, thinning beyond corporate intention, through interaction between technological intrusion and natural solstice alignment, creating unprecedented permeability, allowing Thomas Wheeler's consciousness flowing through genetic connection, established across 3 generations of Wheeler men now simultaneously present within sacred chamber where past, present, and future temporarily existed without chronological separation. Knowledge flooded through Lucas with overwhelming intensity, information transfer transcending verbal communication, while conveying complex understanding regarding dimensional mechanics alongside ceremonial methodology. Traditional guardians had employed maintaining natural balance throughout, centuries before corporate interference. Combined wisdom from scientific understanding and spiritual tradition, synthesizing approach neither Raymond nor Thomas could have developed independently, yet now available through unique convergence. Wheeler bloodline representatives, experiencing simultaneous consciousness through boundary dissolution occurring beyond corporate comprehension. Mrs. Whitefeather recognized transformation manifesting within Lucas, immediately initiating supporting ceremonial components while Jenkins simultaneously implemented remaining countermeasures against security personnel, whose attention focused increasingly toward malfunctioning equipment, rather than potential interference from intruders apparently trapped within chamber, alongside executives facing unexpected system deterioration. Lucas moved with certainty transcending conscious decision, positioning himself precisely where crystalline formation interfaced with extraction technology, hands placed against surfaces where dimensional boundary thinned toward transparency. Reciting ceremonial phrases learned through grandfather's consciousness while simultaneously implementing technical adjustments, Raymond's scientific knowledge identified affecting energy flow direction within apparatus designed exclusively for extraction without consideration regarding potential reversal transformation, rendering sophisticated technology into unintended conduit, redirecting energy completely contrary to corporate intention. The extraction sequence reached critical threshold, precisely as Lucas completed ceremonial preparation. System overload, manifesting through cascading equipment failures, Raymond's sabotage triggered across multiple redundant systems simultaneously. Control interfaces displaying incomprehensible readings before failing completely, while fundamental dimensional boundary separating worlds dissolved entirely, rather than merely thinning as corporate models had predicted, creating unprecedented opening between physical reality and interdimensional space Thomas Wheeler had occupied following original sacrifice decades earlier. Myth. Caldwell recognized unfolding catastrophe seconds before corporate executives. Centuries experience providing contextual understanding beyond scientific measurement. Desperately attempting override sequence interruption through emergency protocols rendered ineffective through combination of Raymond's technical sabotage and Lucas's ceremonial intervention. Corporate confidence transforming toward desperate self-preservation as extraction apparatus exceeded design tolerances through energy reversal, never considered during engineering phase focused exclusively upon acquisition rather than potential reciprocity inherent within natural systems resisting exploitation without corresponding balance maintenance. Temporal distortion affected chamber occupants differently depending proximity to boundary dissolution epicenter. Security personnel experiencing disorientation, while executives witnessed physical manifestations defying conventional reality as dimensional separation temporarily ceased existing through unique convergence factors impossible replicating. Without identical circumstances including bloodline presence, celestial alignment, and ceremonial preparation, centuries' guardianship tradition had prevented occurring until corporate arrogance created precise conditions ancient warnings had specifically prohibited. Through completely dissolved boundaries stepped Thomas Wheeler, physical manifestation temporarily reconstructed through energy abundance, flooding sacred chamber. Simultaneously, elderly man who had vanished decades earlier and timeless entity whose consciousness had expanded beyond human limitation through extended interdimensional existence, focusing immediately upon grandson whose body channeled awareness bridging worlds without complete understanding regarding temporary nature of convergence, creating unprecedented opportunity requiring immediate utilization before natural forces re-established separation. Corporate technology could neither permanently prevent nor control, despite scientific arrogance believing otherwise. Time suspended within the sacred chamber as Thomas Wheeler stood fully manifested between worlds. His physical form simultaneously elderly man who had disappeared decades earlier and luminous entity transcending ordinary human limitation through prolonged interdimensional existence. Knowledge accumulated through consciousness expansion, immediately focused toward completing protection. Ritual interrupted 30 years before, when corporate interference prevented proper guardian transition, preserving mountain's sacred balance. Without hesitation, Thomas embraced grandson whose channeling created manifestation opportunity, while simultaneously acknowledging son whose sacrifice through years of suffering had preserved family connection to sacred responsibility. 3 generations of Wheeler men momentarily united through blood bond, transcending physical limitation, while Mrs. Whitefeather and Jenkins quickly established ceremonial boundary, preventing corporate interference during critical transition process. Thomas guided Lucas through complex ritual, combining ancient traditional knowledge with scientific understanding regarding dimensional mechanics. Movements, precisely choreographed, manipulating energy flows surrounding crystalline formation, while simultaneously creating permanent protection barrier. Corporate technology could neither penetrate nor circumvent, regardless of future extraction attempts. Process requiring blood sacrifice willingly offered, connecting Wheeler lineage directly to Mountain's sacred essence through covenant older than recorded history yet adaptable, incorporating contemporary understanding. Raymond's scientific contribution provided. The completed ritual manifested through visible transformation rippling outward from chamber's center. Crystalline formation absorbing opalescent energy previously harvested through corporate extraction before releasing controlled pulses, realigning dimensional boundaries permanently strengthened against technological interference, while simultaneously restoring natural balance throughout regional ecosystem. Process visibly affecting chamber occupants through different manifestations including corporate executives, experiencing rapid aging proportional to unearned rejuvenation treatments previously received through exploitation without corresponding sacrifice. Ancient systems required maintaining cosmic balance. Thomas Wheeler's physical manifestation gradually thinned as ritual approached completion, smiling toward family with profound peace, replacing determination, previously driving guardian responsibility, explaining necessity, returning interdimensional existence now transformed through ritual completion from imprisonment toward purposeful sentinel role, ensuring newly established protections remained effective against future exploitation attempts. Presence gradually fading while transferring final knowledge elements. Lucas required accepting guardian responsibility continuing. Wheeler family legacy, protecting Mountain's sacred power from forces seeking utilization without understanding or respecting fundamental balance requirements governing natural systems. Mountain energy continued flowing through sacred chamber following ritual completion, healing Raymond completely through balanced application, contrasting sharply with corporate extraction methodology. Restoration possible specifically because Wheeler bloodline connection established through generations of protection service, creating reciprocal relationship between guardian family and guarded resource, expressing natural gratitude through healing freely given matching sacrifice willingly offered. The aftermath unfolded rapidly through cascading consequences. Jenkins Forest Service connections receiving comprehensive documentation Raymond had secretly accumulated during decades working within Vertex organization, evidence triggering federal investigation exposing illegal activities, including environmental violations, fraudulent research methodologies, unauthorized human experimentation, and corporate espionage against environmental protection agencies, resulting executives' arrests, including Carrington facing multiple criminal charges while Caldwell mysteriously vanished before authorities arrived, suggesting Century's experience provided escape capabilities, transcending conventional pursuit methodology. Lucas remained Mountain Guardian following government designation, establishing protected conservation status surrounding sacred sites identified through combined traditional knowledge and scientific verification. Wheeler family property becoming ranger station where Lucas served officially protecting wilderness areas while unofficially maintaining sacred responsibilities inherited through bloodline connection and ceremonial blessing. Mrs. Whitefeather formally bestowed recognizing legitimate succession transcending conventional authority transmission. Scout remaining faithful companion whose unusual capabilities gradually revealed connection with mountain consciousness manifesting through loyal animal form, providing additional protection layer complementing human guardianship. 3 generations of Wheeler men ultimately achieving shared purpose through different contributions, creating protection system, balancing traditional wisdom with contemporary methodology, ensuring mountain's sacred energy remained simultaneously preserved and accessible through appropriate ceremonial approach. Maintaining cosmic balance, ancient guardians had always understood, represented fundamental requirement governing forces older than humanity, yet entrusted to worthy individuals, recognizing responsibility transcending personal benefit through selfless service.